Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep on emotional intelligence, and we've got this amazing speech from psychologist Alejandro Huerta as our guide.
Yeah, it's a good one. She makes a really strong argument for why emotional intelligence is so crucial, like maybe even more important than just plain smarts.
Exactly. Like book smarts only get you so far, right?
Totally. She actually suggests that emotional intelligence might contribute as much as like 80% to a truly fulfilling life.
80%. Wow. That's a big number. So what's that even mean? How does someone develop that?
Well, she gets into all of that. She dives into what emotional intelligence actually is, how it plays out in real life, and why it's so beneficial.
And one of the things that really struck me was this idea that repressing your emotions, like holding them in all the time, can actually lead to physical illness.
Oh, absolutely. That mind-body connection is so powerful. Think about when you're super stressed. Do you get headaches?
Huh.
Or like stomach problems?
Yeah, for sure. And it makes you wonder, like, what else could be going on?
Right. There's a ton of research coming out now that suggests unresolved emotional issues can contribute to a whole bunch of physical ailments.
That's definitely something to think about. Okay, so back to emotional intelligence. It's a term we hear all the time, but what does it actually mean?
Well, Alejandra gives us two really clear definitions in her speech.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first one is all about being able to recognize and differentiate between your own emotions and the emotions of other people. And then using that information to kind of guide your thinking and your behavior.
So it's like being aware of what you're feeling and why, but also being in tune with what's going on with the people around you.
Exactly. And then her second definition builds on that. It emphasizes not just recognizing emotions,
Yeah.
but also understanding and managing them.
So it's not enough to just know what you're feeling. You have to know what to do with those feelings, both in yourself and when you're dealing with other people.
Yeah, like how do you process them? How do you react? How do you express them in a healthy way?
Got it. And that's where the contrast with rational intelligence comes in, right?
Yeah. While both are important, Alejandra makes a really compelling case that emotional intelligence plays a much bigger role in our overall happiness and success in life.
And I remember she tells this story to really drive that point home about a businessman who's incredibly successful. Like, by all outward appearances, he has everything he ever wanted.
Oh, yeah. He's got the corner office, the fancy car, the
Yeah.
money, the whole 9 yards, but he's totally miserable.
Right. He's completely disconnected from his family. He can't relate to his wife or his kids. And he's deeply unhappy because even though he's super smart, he's totally lacking in emotional intelligence.
It's a perfect example of how you can have all the book smarts in the world, but without emotional intelligence, you're missing out on a huge piece of the puzzle.
So if it's so vital, why aren't we taught about emotional intelligence in school? Why isn't it part of the curriculum?
Right. Well, Alejandra is pretty concerned about that, and she actually uses examples like bullying, the rising suicide rate, domestic violence, even road rage, as evidence that we have a serious lack of emotional intelligence in our society.
It's pretty sobering when you think about it that way.
It is. And it makes you wonder, what if we prioritized emotional intelligence? What if it was woven into the fabric of, schools and workplaces and families?
Yeah, what would the world look like then?
Right. It's a question worth pondering. But let's get back to the nitty-gritty for a sec. How do we actually cultivate this emotional intelligence? What does it look like?
Well, thankfully, Alejandra gives us some concrete things to work with. She breaks down emotional intelligence into 7 key components.
And those are self-awareness, self-esteem, assertiveness, positive thinking, self-motivation, empathy, and social skills.
Those are kind of the building blocks, then, the things we need to develop to become more emotionally intelligent.
Exactly. And she has some great insights on each one. Let's start with self-awareness, the foundation of it all.
Okay, so what does she say about self-awareness?
Well, she uses this really adorable analogy of a baby crying. Before babies even understand what they're feeling, they cry to communicate that something's wrong.
It's like their way of expressing their needs, right?
Yeah, exactly. And as adults, we need to learn to do the same thing, even with the more uncomfortable emotions. We need to recognize and acknowledge them. It's like tuning into your own internal radio station, What signals are you picking up?
And how do those signals impact your thoughts and behavior?
Right. So that's self-awareness. Then we've got self-esteem, which is another tricky one.
Because it can be so easily influenced by external factors, like what other people think of us or what we see in the media.
Exactly. Alejandra emphasizes the importance of having a healthy sense of self-worth, avoiding the extremes of low self-esteem, putting yourself down all the time and being overly egotistical,
It's about finding that balance, right? Believing in yourself without being arrogant.
right? And she also talks about the influence of parenting styles and societal pressures on how our self-esteem develops.
Like how our childhood experiences and the messages we receive from the world around us can shape how we view ourselves.
Exactly. And then another super important component is assertiveness.
Assertiveness. I feel like that one's often misunderstood.
It is. People sometimes confuse it with being aggressive, but it's totally different.
Okay, how does Alejandra define assertiveness?
Well, she uses this really great example of someone cutting you in line. How would you react?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think most of us have been there.
Right. So think about it. A passive person might just let it happen, not wanting to cause a fuss.
And an aggressive person would probably yell and make a scene, right?
Totally. But an assertive person would calmly but firmly address the situation, advocating for themselves while still respecting the other person.
It's about finding that middle ground, being direct without being a jerk.
Exactly. It's about knowing your worth and standing up for yourself, but in a way that doesn't bulldoze over other people.
And that takes practice.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a skill you have to develop, just like anything else. And then we've got empathy, which, like assertiveness, I think can be a little tricky.
Yeah, how so?
Well, people often think empathy means like taking on other people's burdens, absorbing their pain and stuff.
Right, like becoming overwhelmed by other people's emotions.
Exactly. But Alejandra says it's really more about understanding someone else's perspective without necessarily taking on their emotional baggage.
So it's about like stepping into their shoes and seeing the world from their point of view, but not getting lost in their feelings.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. She gives this example of like, imagine you're in a crowded city and you see someone who's clearly lost and looking distressed.
Okay, I can picture that.
An empathetic person would not only recognize that the person is upset, but they'd also try to help, maybe offer directions or just a kind word.
It's about recognizing their experience and connecting with them on a human level, even if you don't fully understand what they're going through.
Exactly. And then the final component of emotional intelligence is communication, which, it's kind of the glue that holds everything together, right?
Yeah, for sure. Without good communication, all the other stuff kind of falls apart.
Right. And Alejandra really hits on this point about how important it is to connect with others and express yourself effectively.
And like, really connect, not just go through the motions.
Totally. And she paints this picture, which I think a lot of us can relate to, of a family sitting down to dinner together, but everyone's on their phones completely tuned out of the actual conversation.
Oh man, that's so true. It's like we're together, but not really present.
Exactly. And Alejandra was really advocating for a return to like genuine face-to-face interaction. Putting down the phones, turning off the screens, and just being present with each other.
Because true communication, it's not just about the words we say, right?
Yeah.
It's also about eye contact, body language, that kind of unspoken energy exchange that happens when you're really tuned in to another person.
Totally. Okay, so we've covered these key components of emotional intelligence, but now let's talk about how we actually use them in real life. How do we actually recognize and manage our emotions?
Yeah, let's get practical.
All right, so Alejandra starts by breaking down the 4 basic emotions, fear, anger, sadness, and joy.
The classics.
Right. And she goes deep into each one, explaining how they can be valuable signals, like they're trying to tell us something.
Okay, let's take fear, for instance. What does she say about that?
Well, she describes it as a feeling of like disproportion between your resources and whatever situation you're facing. She uses this analogy of like passing a semi-truck on the highway.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling. That little moment of hesitation where you're like, can I do this? Is it safe?
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that fear is a natural response, but we don't have to let it control us. Sometimes leaning into those moments of fear can actually be really empowering.
Like once you've done it, you realize it wasn't as scary as you thought it would be, and you feel this sense of accomplishment.
Exactly. And then with anger, Alejandra explains that it can often signal that our boundaries are being crossed.
So like if someone's doing something that makes you feel uncomfortable or disrespected, anger can be a cue to like pay attention and do something about it.
Yeah. And she talks about the importance of responding assertively rather than either suppressing your anger or, completely exploding.
So it's about finding that balance again, like with self-esteem.
Totally. It's about communicating your needs clearly and directly, but without aggression.
And then with sadness, Alejandra emphasizes the importance of allowing ourselves to actually grieve, especially after a loss.
Yeah, we live in a culture that's so focused on like being happy and positive all the time that we often try to bypass sadness.
But sadness is a natural part of life, right? It's how we process loss and pain.
Exactly. And she encourages us to allow those feelings to flow, to cry if we need to talk about it, to just let ourselves feel it fully.
It's like giving yourself permission to heal.
Exactly.
hmm
Okay, and last but not least, we have joy.
Ah, joy. Everyone's favorite emotion.
Right. But Alejandra reminds us to actually savor those moments of joy. Pay attention to the things that make you happy, the activities and experiences that bring you a sense of fulfillment.
It's about actively cultivating positivity in our lives.
Exactly. And she has this great suggestion of keeping a joy journal, just jotting down a few things each day that made you smile.
I love that. It's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle of life and forget to appreciate the little things.
Totally. But sometimes emotions can be super overwhelming, right? Like, what do we do when we're feeling flooded with intense emotions, whether it's anger or sadness or even just stress?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. How do we manage those big feelings effectively?
Well, Alejandra outlines this helpful framework called the stimulus emotion thought action cycle.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that mean?
So it basically means that you encounter a stimulus. Something happens, let's say someone cuts you off in traffic.
Okay, yeah, been there.
That triggers an emotion, in this case probably anger. Then you have a thought about it, like, that jerk, he could have hit me. And finally, that thought leads to an action. You honk your horn, you yell, you maybe even make a rude gesture.
Yeah, I can see how that cycle plays out.
But the key is that we can actually interrupt that cycle. We don't have to just react automatically.
So how do we do that? How do we stop ourselves from just flying off the handle?
Well, Alejandra suggests taking a time out when you feel those intense emotions starting to bubble up.
Like a literal timeout.
Yeah. It could be as simple as taking a few deep breaths or just stepping away from the situation for a moment.
Kind of like hitting the pause button on your emotions.
Exactly. It creates a little space between the stimulus and your reaction, which gives you a chance to choose how you want to respond rather than just reacting impulsively.
And she also suggests engaging in calming activities like listening to music, spending time in nature, or practicing meditation, right?
Totally. It's about finding whatever works for you to kind of shift your emotional state and bring yourself back to a place of calm and clarity.
And of course, assertive communication is key too.
Absolutely. Instead of bottling up your feelings or just exploding, learning to express yourself clearly and respectfully can make a huge difference.
It's about advocating for yourself while also considering the other person's perspective.
Exactly. And Alejandra really stresses that emotional intelligence isn't about being nice all the time.
Yeah.
It's about being authentic and self-aware.
So it's not about suppressing your emotions, it's about understanding them and choosing how to express them in a healthy way.
Yeah, exactly. So we've talked a lot about the components of emotional intelligence and how to manage our emotions, but Alejandra takes it a step further. She really emphasizes this idea of aligning our actions with our values and our emotions.
And we love that. It's about living with integrity, making sure that what we do on the outside matches up with what we believe and feel on the inside.
Exactly. And she poses this really thought-provoking question. How often do we actually listen to what our emotions are trying to tell us?
That's a good one. Are we living in alignment with those core values? Or are we just going through the motions, maybe acting out of habit or fear or societal pressure?
It's a call to really examine our lives and make sure we're walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
I think a lot of people struggle with that, It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of the bigger picture.
Totally. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in. It gives us the tools to not only understand our emotions, but to use them as a guide for living a more authentic and fulfilling life.
So it's not just about personal growth, it's about creating a world where people are more in tune with themselves and each other.
Exactly. Remember earlier when you mentioned Alejandra reveals the key to changing our planet at the end of her speech?
Yeah, what does she mean by that?
Well, for her, it all boils down to consciousness, and she believes that the way we cultivate consciousness is through education.
So she's talking about a fundamental shift in how we approach education.
Totally. She thinks we need to move away from this model of just cramming kids' heads full of facts and figures and start focusing on developing their emotional intelligence.
Because knowing how to solve an equation doesn't necessarily help you navigate a difficult social situation or understand why you're feeling angry.
Exactly. She envisions a world where kids are taught self-awareness, empathy, communication skills, all the stuff we've been talking about.
Imagine a generation growing up equipped with those skills. It could completely change the game.
Right. Think about a world where people are better able to understand and manage their own emotions, connect with each other authentically, resolve conflicts peacefully.
It's a beautiful vision.
It is. And Alejandra doesn't just stop at schools. She believes that workplaces have a responsibility to foster emotional intelligence as well.
So it's not just about changing the way we educate kids, it's about creating more emotionally intelligent environments in all areas of life.
Exactly. Imagine a work environment where people feel heard and valued, where conflict is addressed constructively, and where collaboration and innovation thrive.
It sounds amazing, but how do we get there?
Well, Alejandra challenges us to completely rethink our approach. It starts with recognizing that emotional intelligence is just as important as any other kind of intelligence.
And then it's about creating spaces where people can develop those skills and feel comfortable expressing their emotions.
Totally. And she reminds us that emotionally intelligent workplaces are not only more humane, but they're also more productive and successful in the long run.
So it's a win-win, really.
Absolutely. And Alejandra also emphasizes the role of families in developing emotional intelligence.
So it starts at home, with parents modeling those behaviors and creating a safe space for kids to express their feelings.
Exactly. It's about teaching kids to recognize and label their emotions, to understand the impact of their actions on others, and to develop healthy coping mechanisms for dealing with stress and challenging situations.
It's about giving them the tools to navigate the complexities of life.
Exactly. And Alejandra ends her speech with this really beautiful quote. "The people will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel."
That's so true. We might not remember the exact words someone said, but we'll always remember how they made us feel, whether it was heard, understood, valued, or dismissed.
It's a powerful reminder to act with intention and be mindful of the emotional energy we bring to our interactions.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Alejandra Huerta's speech is a powerful call to action, a reminder that emotional intelligence isn't just about personal growth, it's about creating a better world for everyone.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that our emotions connect us all, and that by cultivating emotional intelligence, we can build a more compassionate, just, and fulfilling world for ourselves and future generations.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into emotional intelligence. I hope you all learned as much as I did.
It's been a pleasure. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.